So it was kind of fun, kind of nerve-wracking to prepare this today, because I'm like, okay, these are my colleagues. I present so many places, so many all around. In fact, tomorrow I'm driving out to Chilliwack, and I have different presentations on the keynote for their Pro D Day and things like that. But I actually was trying to figure out, how do I sort of take what I've been doing for the last 2 decades. So I hope you're here for a few hours now. But I tried to think about some things that I would like sort of to say, things that I'm excited about right now, things that I'm working on that I'm really loving to do, and then some things that I'm kind of curious about and wondered if people could have some input on that. So I titled, and I just have taken just one stream of my research, which is, as you see, promoting empathy, kindness, and altruism in childhood and adolescence. And I will say 2 things. One is that I started off, some of you might know, I started off as a middle school teacher. I taught 7th and 8th grade French, and then I taught high school and alternative high school for kids with severe emotional and behavioral disorders, and then also worked in a school in a residential treatment institution for 3.5 years, where I lived and worked with kids who were considered hopeless cases because of their severe emotional and behavioral disorders. And it was really in those formative years, and it was kind of the thing where when you graduate for your undergrad, people say, do you go right to graduate school or do you take some time? And I decided to, take the advice of taking several years before I went back to do the research. And it was really those years of working with those kids that taught me so much. And really was about not thinking about their deficits and all their problems and all worse things get worse, but I really learned so much of them about how you can create the conditions where even these kids who are considered hopeless to help them thrive and flourish. And so many of the things that I experienced while working are questions that I had when I came into doing my own research. So really for more than 2 decades now, I've been doing research on empathy, compassion, altruism, and really trying to figure out what are the conditions in which we can promote these in children and adolescents, and really trying to sort of pick away at what are the ways in which we can foster these qualities, not only because it's better for children and families, but it's better for the world and better for what we need to be doing now to create a more compassionate world. And I think even now, as we sort of look around and hear the news, it even becomes more compelling of how we need to focus on children and do these things in a preventative way. So I have a bit of a introduction. I have some of the research is now showing a declining trend in the past few decades in empathy in youth. Some of the recent science, and I have framed it around some different recent studies, some of my own, some not of my own, some lingering questions I have, and then sort of some of the future projects I'm working on. Just to kind of give you a scope of some of my recent research, I put sort of 3 buckets for it. One bucket is evaluating the effectiveness of social and emotional learning programs. So I've been doing for the past decade or 15 years really studies, randomized controlled trials of programs in schools that promote social and emotional learning. And I'll tell you about a few of those today, but that's kind of one area of research I do a lot of work evaluating. And I have to say, it's sort of more an experimental way, not sort of in a program evaluation, but really the idea that I'm interested in learning what are the mechanisms, so designing an experiment and testing it out in a real world setting. The second area, I do a lot of research on resiliency and well-being in children and adolescents, and one of my most recent studies is looking at a population-level measure of child well-being for 4th and grade 7 students called the Middle Years Development Instrument, and that's out of the Human Early Learning Partnership. And to date, we actually have data on 35,000 children in British Columbia, and we're now able to link it with their kindergarten. So in kindergarten, their teachers complete something called the EDI, or Early Development Instrument. In 4th grade, the kids report on their own well-being and assets and social-emotional competence, connections to adults in schools and neighborhoods, at home, as well as after-school activities, and then grade 7. So we now have data linkage for 15,000 children, and we just now receive, and linkage to all education data across past high school graduation, well, up to high school graduation, and we just now have the linkage to all health data for 250,000 children. So from the day they're born and their APGAR score till early adulthood. So I want to bring that up. I'm just raising it because it's like this wealth of data set. Students, if you have any questions, or I really want to invite collaborators for this because it's a huge data set at help located there, and lots of opportunities for students to get involved in asking all kinds of questions. And kids with special needs, and we have identifiers for all kids with special needs, autism, all sorts of things. So it's really, anyway. And then the last one, I just completed a scan of social and emotional learning and teacher education across universities in both the US and Canada. And I'm not going to talk about that, but just we want to look at how much do teachers, when they're learning to be teachers, get any content on the social and emotional lives of children, resiliency, how you promote those. I can give you the answer right now. None, or very little. UBC is doing more than most. The other thing I want to really emphasize in all of my research, and it's that I've taken very seriously, is the idea of university community collaboration. So besides collaborating with a number of faculty members across UBC and outside of UBC, I also work with a number of community agencies with this notion of translational research. So I don't believe, I spend a lot of time talking to media, working with others, saying how do we summarize these findings for practitioners, for teachers. I'm working with the BC Ministry of Education as well as a number of organizations. Here's some. I've worked with a lot of different, besides the school boards, the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education I work with quite a lot. Anyway, so I just have to say that to me, that's another very important part of my work, is about this idea of knowledge to practice and influencing those kinds of things. So I'll have to see how fast I can make this in that, because I have some things that I wanted to start with this story. And so sort of following up on that line of translational research, I feel that it's so important to give a context to the research and to figure out what that context is. And so for me, this quote, "Educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all," is kind of one that's really influenced me a great deal. And this idea of how education should include this focus on not just academic achievement, but things like empathy, compassion, but well-being and mental health and all of those. 2,300 years ago, this idea was around. So it's been around for a long time. However, I would argue that really the last decade, particularly around neuroscience and the sort of innovations we've had where we've learned more about the brain, has really now provided the science behind this statement to say, in fact, this is true. How we feel affects how we learn. I'll give you just one quick tidbit from some recent science that came out. When you're in a positive, so when you're marking papers that are subjective, when you're in a positive mood, you give higher marks than if you're in a more negative mood. And they actually have done a study experiment where they do positive mood induction and find that. So positive moods affects how we learn. When we're not happy, or when we're in a positive mood, we actually retain more information and are more creative. Versus if we're stressed, we become very tunnel focused and not able to kind of see the out thing. So so that's one piece of that. So I talk about studying prosocialness. I don't want to some people call it prosociality, prosocialness, and what I wanted to just make sure I define it in terms of this notion of cooperativeness, helpfulness, sharing, and being empathic. It's kind of this idea of prosocial. So when I'm looking at prosociality, it is around those aspects. I won't go into all the definition factors of empathy versus sympathy. I will tell you altruism is actually helping someone with no expectation of reward. Compassion is about feeling empathy for someone but wanting to do something about it. So empathy alone is not sufficient. I also have to say I've been looking at some work recently on empathy fatigue, which I imagine counseling is very much a big thing in other kind of helping professions. But I just want to sort of define that idea. So the question is can it be taught? And I have to say that for as long as I've been doing this work, a lot of people say no. A lot of people say you're born that way. There's a very, and I don't know if it's just in the public, or a lot of people really believe that, you're born to be kind and you can't really teach it. You get this mean kid and I can't really do anything about it. But the science is saying that it can. So I'm going to give you just a quick example, actually just a story, and just kind of a side note. My husband, Arlie, is a social psychologist. So he teaches a course on influence, saying if you want ideas to stick, if you want to try and get your message across, It isn't, data alone does not do it. It's the story and the data. That the combination are more likely to have an influence in changing people's attitudes, attributions, beliefs, and things like that. So I have to start with the story. I've been doing research on the Roots of Empathy program for about 15 years. And I'm not doing any studies right now, but I've been to, done it here in Isle of Man. I've gone there, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, lots of different places where I've done some research on the Roots of Empathy. And essentially, the Roots of Empathy is a program. Some of you have heard of it. Some of you might know it really well. It's a program in which you bring, it was developed in 1996 in Toronto by a woman named Mary Gordon, and developed this program where you bring an infant at the beginning of the school year, who's 2 to 4 months old, once a month into a classroom with a Roots of Empathy instructor, and every month the children learn about empathy, and really the baby's kind of a springboard for talking about emotions, how we feel, but also how we care about others. So there's one lesson, actually they learn about temperament. And so all the children, it's kindergarten through 8th grade, the program is for, there's 27 lessons in the curriculum, and the children learn about the baby, but they learn, but the baby's really kind of, I want to say a prop, but not really, but the baby's really this way that you kind of engage in this very authentic way to how we talk about, how we feel about the baby, how we feel about ourselves, how we understand the world. So I'm going to just start with a story from a Roots of Empathy classroom that I entitle A Baby to Snuggle In. I'm going to read it to you. I know it by heart, but I'm just going to read it to you. And this is from Mary Gordon's perspective. She wrote a book called Roots of Empathy, Changing the World Child by Child, in which she is talking about her experience watching a Roots of Empathy classroom in Toronto, I believe it was. So, and it kind of illustrates this idea of what can you bring to a classroom to promote empathy. So Darren was the oldest child I ever saw in a Roots of Empathy class. He was in grade 8 and had been held back twice. He was 2 years older than everyone else and already started to grow a beard. I knew his story. His mother had been murdered in front of his eyes when he was 4 years old, and he had lived in a succession of foster homes ever since. Darren looked menacing because he wanted us to know he was tough. His head was shaved except for a ponytail at the top, and he had a tattoo on the back of his head. The instructor of the Roots of Empathy program was explaining to the class about differences in temperament that day. She invited the young mother who was visiting the class with Evan, her 6-month-old baby, to share her thoughts about her baby's temperament. Joining in the discussion, the mother told the class how Evan liked to face outwards when he was in the snuggly and didn't want to cuddle into her, and how she would have preferred to have a more cuddly baby. As the class ended, the mother asked if anyone wanted to try on the snuggly. Everyone knows what a snuggly is, which was green and trimmed with pink brocade. To everyone's surprise, Darren offered to try it. And as the other students scrambled to get ready for lunch, he strapped it on. Then he asked if he could put Evan in it. The mother was a little apprehensive, but she handed him the baby, and he put Evan in facing towards his chest. That wise little baby snuggled right in, and Darren took him into a quiet corner and rocked back and forth with the baby in his arms for several minutes. Finally, he came back to where the mother and the Roots of Empathy instructor were waiting, and he asked, "If nobody has ever loved you, do you think you still could be a good father?" So, you know, it's interesting, as I mentioned before from the beginning, this idea of, so first of all, I really feel like I can't talk about social emotional involvement without trying to make you cry. I will say, because I'm doing a mood induction here.
Mood induction, yeah.
But also to make a point of this idea that often these kinds of kids, like Darren, we write off and say they're incapable of doing these kinds of things, of caring for others. And often, we don't give them a voice to express their fears, their wishes, their concerns about their future, about their lives. And what I argue is bringing these programs into schools, like the Roots of Empathy, and I'll talk about a couple of others, gives that opportunity to really have that perspective, to really to be able to have those concerns addressed, hopefully with the teacher being adequately prepared. But and that's really where my research has gone, with how do we do this, how do we create the conditions where you can promote well-being. And I'm just going to go quickly through, actually I'm going to go through very quickly, just to tell you, there is some recent research, but we can debate it. It says adolescents today are less empathic and more self-absorbed than previous generations. There was one study that was done of about, it was maybe 14,000 college students from 1979 to 2009 using the same empathy measure of the interpersonal reactivity index, and found a significant decline in empathy scores, especially since the year 2000. So the question is why? Another study that I really found interesting was on prosocial development in Italy and in Canada. And they looked at prosocial development. You think that development, as kids get older, they get better. So the whole idea was that toddlers are kind of egocentric and self-centered, and then as you get older, you become more able to share and help and cooperate. Well, this longitudinal study found the opposite to be true. It actually found, and they report a lot, that prosocial development, or caring, sharing, helping, cooperating, actually decreases across elementary to adolescence. The kids become less kind and helpful and caring. Now, the question is it inevitable? Is it something like hormones kicking in or some brain development happening? And that's kind of the kind of questions I'm having. And to me, this was quite interesting that they saw, and this was teacher reports. They found the same in mothers' reports, self-reports, peer reports, declines across all these different age groups, and a longitudinal study. So the question is why? So what I talk about is what now, and what I talk about this idea of looking from deficits to developmental potential, promoting resiliency, and I love this. This is one of my students this summer in my 585 class. We talked about this. It's talking about, we could focus on intervention, which is like the kids are sinking in the water and you throw them out the life preserver and you reel them back in. But really, my research is focused on prevention, this idea of giving them these skills, like understanding themselves, understanding others, to prevent these problems. They give them the life jacket so that when they fall in the water, they're equipped with those kinds of skills. And so social and emotional learning, I'm not going to talk about, but it is a growing movement across the US and Canada. And in fact, BC is the first jurisdiction, I believe, in North America, which its new transforming education is including social and emotional learning as part of the K-12 curriculum now. It's called personal and social competency. It's going to be embedded within all K-12 curricular areas. But it really, I'm not going to go into it. But what the research is showing is that these prosocial behaviors are malleable. So I'm now going to just, in the next 13 minutes, kind of go through a couple of different research studies very quickly of this interdisciplinary approach, because I feel that trying to answer or chip away at this question of prosociality, how do we do that, it in itself takes an interdisciplinary approach. It can't just be sort of one lens, and we have to look at it from different lens, from a social psychological lens of group context, from individual development, from looking at educational practices. So the first one, I'm going to take you through an evolutionary perspective. And I'm trying to embed some of the articles that have influenced me. So there's this great article called The Evolutionary Basis of Risky Adolescent Behavior, Implications for Science, Policy, and Practice. And it's a great article that goes through that the risky behaviors we see in adolescence today are not inevitable. They're actually a sign of our times, of what we've stripped away from adolescence from previous centuries that they had available to them. So one of the things they talk about is this environmental mismatch, where basically when they can dysregulate adolescent development and behavior, and they use the case of age segregation, the idea that we just put all these kids together in these same age groups. And they talked about back in previous generations, we had such mixed age grouping where the older took care of the younger children, and there was lots of things that happened developing that sense. So the roots of empathy, as I mentioned before, is this notion of it has 27 lessons. Here's the themes, the 9 themes across the group. So children every month are taught these lessons, kindergarten through 8th grade. If anyone wants to see the curriculum, I have everything in my research lab. But let me just give you an example of the activities that kids do. So it isn't just about learning about emotions and understanding the baby. They also, every month, they do something collectively that benefits the baby. So for example, here's baby Emma is in a 2nd grade classroom. The classroom activity for the month of December was for every child, and they try and integrate it in the curriculum, for the teacher first to brainstorm, what do you think baby Emma's words will be by the time she's 2 years old? What words do you think she would have? So the kids all brainstormed. Then each child took one of the words, took a fabric square, wrote the word on there, drew the picture of what it was, and the teacher sewed them all together in a quilt, and they provided that to baby Emma and her mom for Christmas. So actually the last lesson is every child, they make a wishing tree, and every child makes a wish for the baby's life and presents it to the baby. So there's something about the roots of empathy that's not only about sort of understanding yourself, understanding others, but about us working together to do something that benefits another human being. So what about the research? And I'm just going to give you one of the research, we have a couple of papers out on this, but we looked at prosocialness. So we wanted to see how do peers, so we did peer nominations at both pre-test and post-test in the study of 4th to 7th grade children, about 500 in Vancouver and Toronto, through this quasi-experimental study. I'm just going through this very fast, I'm so sorry. But anyways, the bottom line is, what we found in terms of sharing, cooperation, help, kindness, taking views, and fair. And the green ones are the roots of empathy kids, the white, or whatever color that is, are the kids in the comparison group. And this is change scores from pre to post test, is you found that kids who got roots of empathy significantly increased, or their peers perceived them as being more sharing, cooperating, helping, kind, taking views, and fair. Whereas you see a trend actually, and I've seen this in several studies, where from the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year, the kids in the comparison group actually get worse. It isn't like they stay the same, they actually become less trusting, less likely to like their peers. There's something happening in the typical classroom where kids get worse. Anyway, and you'll see another theme there. So what are some reasons of what's happening in this classroom context? You know, I take sort of a social psychological approach, might be about Tajfeld's social identity theory of in-groups and out-groups, and there's something that happens over the school year where kids become, especially during 4th to 7th grade, kids become more part of cliques, and they're more like out-groups, you're not part of our group. Is there something about the development of emotions that's happening there, of how they understand others? Or is there something even about neuroscience? So sort of a study that I have waiting to happen is to see, there's some research saying that, do you all know what oxytocin is? It increases, it makes us happy. It's kind of like the love neuropeptide. Especially after, we used to think it focused on birth and nursing, but now we know that everyone has it and oxytocin is good. Well, there's been some research done with voles. Does everyone know what a vole is like? That actually shows that when you take a newborn pup and put it next to the vole that's a non-parental vole, that the oxytocin increases. So one question would be, from a biological perspective, do you think bringing the infant into the classroom is actually increasing everyone's oxytocin? I'm saying I haven't done that study yet, because right now the primary ways to get oxytocin from people are blood or urine. And I'm not quite ready for the pee study. I've done the saliva study, but anyway, so, but I actually have a grant proposal kind of looking into this, of looking into collecting oxytocin to see if in fact, and I have a whole study designed around that. And I also talk about, there's this great article from Irvin Stolp that talks about to create a nonviolent, caring world, to create goodness, it is essential to extend the boundaries of us, inclusive caring, the extension of caring to the other, ideally to all human beings. So it just talks about when you create these opportunities that I really believe that the roots of empathy, there's something about collectively as a classroom doing things that benefit another human being that disrupts this normal in-group, out-group. We work together to do things. And there's not enough research on this, I just have to say, about how we actually do that. And then some of the other research I do, I'm just trying to think of where I want to go, because I have 6 more minutes. There's one study I want to, can I skip forward? Do you guys mind? Because I feel like I will just say, just quickly, I do research on mindfulness, and we have a recent article. Oh, here, I will show you this real quick. This is a gratitude circle that happened in October. Does anyone notice this person in the gratitude circle that joined with the kids in 4th and 5th grade? That was kind of cool. You totally, I know that was kind of neat to have the Dalai Lama right there in that. I will just say we have a recent article on the program in which I've been doing research, Mind Up, in developmental psych in this past month. And it was a randomized controlled trial. We looked at cortisol, we looked at executive function, and it was really good. It's actually gotten, yeah, it's been great. And we're doing a follow-up of the kids who are now in high school who were in this study, and following them up to see if there's, what's the durability of these findings after several years of, okay, but I just want to show you this one cool study. Okay, we collected saliva in that study. I just want to, I think this is the one, anyways, I want to just show. So I have, yeah, because I really just have like a few minutes. Okay, so, and I'll just tell you briefly about another study we did. So I've done research on the Mind Up. We have a study with teachers called Smart in Education, where we look at mindfulness intervention for teachers to reduce stress and burnout. We have a study now that looks at Mind Up plus Smart in Education to see if teachers get their own practice to reduce stress, if they actually are better able to deliver the Mind Up program, and are there added benefits to the kids. We find yes so far. We have another study where we did a random acts of kindness intervention that was very simple, where we had 4th and 5th grade kids. We randomly assigned 20 classrooms or 19 classrooms to do a random acts of kindness intervention. Where one group, for 4 weeks, just on Monday you got an envelope that said, tomorrow we'd like you to do 3 acts of kindness for other people. And, but remember what you did, because on Thursday we're going to come back and ask you what you did. And the other group did a whereabouts condition, where you got the same envelope, an envelope that said, remember where you go the next 3 places you go tomorrow, but remember where you go, because we're going to ask you to write it down. We did it for 4 weeks, just every Monday they got the packet, Thursday they wrote it down. And then before and after, we measured their empathy, well, their happiness, but also how much they liked each other in the classroom, and found that you guys, at the end of this very, 10-minute intervention, 15-minute intervention that they had to do, increased in how much you liked everybody in your classroom. Nothing happened to you guys. Anyway, that one was, but it kind of foreshadows this other one, and I do want to talk about this one because it's kind of a cool study. So Edith Chen in psychology, who does health psychology, she's now at Northwestern, came to me a few years ago saying, Kim, I know you do all this research on empathy and kindness and volunteering and things like that. Do you know of any research that's looked at if adolescent volunteering actually influences their health? She was a health psychologist, studies asthma and other kinds of social determinants of health things. And I said, I know of nothing, but I knew about this program called Experience Corps with senior citizens. I guess it's in Baltimore. And it gets senior citizens to go and volunteer with elementary school children, and they found health benefits for the seniors. So we went to, so the tricky part of this study was, so we wanted to see an inner city school, so we looked in Vancouver, inner city school of adolescents, low socioeconomic status, to see if there were health benefits to volunteering. And I don't know if people know how Vancouver works. There's these their family of school teams where the schools are connected to their feeder schools, and there's often after-school programs. So we were able to go to Vancouver, say, can we work in one of the inner city schools and do this random assignment to a volunteering? And we basically got grade 10, Planning 10, if anyone knows Planning 10, great place to go. And we said, can we do this study in Planning 10? But by the way, because we want to look at health, we're going to have to collect their blood. So lovely Vancouver School Board let us set up a classroom to do blood draws. So we first went to the kids and we collected, we got 106 kids on board, over 90% participation rate. There was money, okay, they give you their blood for $15, okay? And then we first took blood to get cholesterol and something called IL-6, and then we took height and weight for body mass index, and we also did a whole bunch of measures of empathy and things like that. Then we randomly assigned half of them, you guys get it this time, to go 1 day a week for an hour and a half in one of the feeder elementary schools after school for 10 weeks. So every one, you were assigned a small group of kids you went with to the elementary school, and you crafts and after school sports and things like that. You just did whatever you usually do. So 10 weeks, so first collect the blood, body mass index, then they did these activities. We monitored physical activity actually in both groups to make sure we could control for that. And it was great. It was published in Journal of the American Medical Association Pediatrics, the first study ever to show that kids not only significantly decreased cholesterol and IL-6 and body mass index. and that those kids who who had the greatest rise in empathy as a result of the intervention had the best risk. So basically showed that this intervention can improve cardiovascular health by such a short time. So I realize that at my time, but that it's kind of it doesn't give you the whole sense of things, but just the idea that what I'm still plugging away trying to figure out the ways in which we can do this, but it might not be so complicated. I think is one thing to promote empathy, compassion. And the benefits aren't just by creating more kind, caring people, but it actually might have huge health implications for our society by engaging kids in these activities that are about helping others.